I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Mosaic of Wine Series 2. Today's guest, Matthew Della, MW, is the CEO of Wirra Wirra and Ashton Hills, two of Australia's most iconic and admired wineries. Matt previously spent 8 years in the US as Chief Operating Officer of Tor, a cult Napa Valley winery, and with the legendary Robert Mondavi Winery. Later becoming Chief Global Sales and Marketing Officer for Villa Maria. Matt also serves on the board of the McLaren Vale Grape Wine and Tourism Association and leads the charge for Australian wine exports as chair of the Export Advisory Committee. In today's episode, we cover Matt's origin story, exploring early mentors on the journey, and the commercialization focus that characterized his career in New Zealand, US, and Australia. We take a deep dive into Wirra Wirra, talking customer segmentation and end need states, as well as translating the McLaren Vale story. We talk connection and communication with new drinkers, learning from other categories, opportunities from wine club and events, before broadening the conversation to Australian opportunities for media storytelling, and the value of unpacking the diversity of Australian wine for the world. Enjoy.
I just feel blessed because I've had the good fortune to have a lot of great mentors. So I started out in the wine industry in New Zealand, and my first proper job was actually working for Bob Campbell, who's Master of Wine. And I worked for his wine school, the Wine Gallery. And then I was there only for about a year and then moved on into sales. Mm-hmm. And I guess since then, I've always been on the commercialization side of wine, which sounds incredibly unromantic, but it's been wonderful. It's been an incredible opportunity to travel around the world quite intensively and live overseas. So I live in Australia right now. Prior to that, I lived in California for 8 years, and it's been and I've been able to travel to places that most people wouldn't bother going, but some of the most beautiful places in the world and meet some of the most wonderful people. So it's been a great journey so far.
Amazing. And I mean, just again, a little bit of context. So like where did you grow up, and were there earlier seeds planted, around going into wine and, just a general, appreciation of wine?
Yeah, there were. So I grew up in Auckland, New Zealand, and my parents, they were regular wine drinkers, and they continue to be regular wine drinkers well into their mid-80s. But they, at the time, they were drinking, the 4-litre casks of wine, which were quite common in New Zealand back then. It was very sweet Muller-Thurgau. That didn't really get me into wine. I remember at one of my sort of birthdays in my late teens, a family friend took us out for dinner, and he bought a bottle of Bollinger, and he asked me, what do you smell in this? And I think it was just such a bizarre question for me. Like, what do you smell in this strange adult drink that, I'd never really thought about before. But I smelled it, and I said, I actually smell like grilled nuts and toast and things. And he said, yeah, absolutely. That's because of this, that, and the other. And he bought me Jane McQuitty's champagne book, Champagne and Sparkling Wines of the World book. And the next time we saw him, and he was a weekly visitor at our house, the next time I saw him, I said, I really like that book. And he's like, what? And it was sort of intended to be a guide, but I read it cover to cover, and then my dad had an old, I think, second edition of Hugh Johnston's Wine Atlas, so I read that cover to cover. And Bob Campbell encouraged me to take Hugh Johnston's Story of Wine and go page by page, and on the page for St. Julien, I go out to the wine shop and buy a bottle of St. Julien and taste it and read about the soils and the climate and how the wines are made and make those connections. And that's always been, hugely fascinating for me, the way that wine can be so different depending on where and how it's grown and made.
Yeah, and it's I always find it interesting. It's you obviously had a great mentor and inspiration there, and just almost that kind of homework, really. I guess the kind of best kind of homework. It sounds as though it was kind of very early on. It was almost like started training your brain to make those connections. It's actually something that's come up quite a number of times. I mean, I remember most clearly when I was speaking with Barbara Drew at MW, and she was just saying, a lot of times the students she works with, they'll almost they'll try to treat theory and tasting as two completely separate things. But she's always saying, kind of, what are you doing? It's like, you'll get clues from one another, and presumably you'll make your experiences, you'll make a stronger connection, and you'll remember better, and you'll just, you'll internalize it if you treat those two things as complementary and try to integrate them.
Absolutely. And when you get to go and visit these places, then everything all clicks into place. But it's amazing how much you can, and God, this was long before Google Earth or anything like that. It's amazing how much you can glean out of books.
And and take us, I guess, really on in the journey then, because as you've alluded to, your path has sort of taken you all over the world. But you would say that commercialization has been kind of the underpinning theme, really, kind of connecting those experiences?
Yeah, that's right. And so got involved in a small wine business in Auckland, importing, and then in 2012 moved up to California and to work for Constellation. And that was fascinating because all of my experience until then had really been very on the ground and very roll up your sleeves and this was my opportunity to really step back and learn about strategy and research and all these good things. And I think being able to kind of put those together in my subsequent career has been really terrific. So I feel blessed that I've had so many diverse experiences, from being part of a small business to being part of a Fortune 500 company, and then I was chief operating officer for Tor in Napa Valley, which was a very high end cult winery, and then I was chief wine officer for Wine Access, so that was kind of really sort of intense digital e-commerce kind of cutting edge stuff. And then back down to New Zealand, being part of Villa Maria and being involved in the sale of Villa Maria to the Endivin Group and staying on the Endivin Group leadership team. And that gave me, another sort of layer of rigor and then now for the past almost 3 years leading the Wirra Wirra business.
Yeah. And no, it's I love it. And I think you've very naturally there kind of transitioned into what I call expertise, where I think you've gone from, okay, this is where I kind of, this is where I came from and kind of, this is where I am now. And I think it would maybe be, you've kind of taken us, to the door almost of Wirra Wirra there. And I think that might be, rather than necessarily, going through each and every one of those prior experiences, which, we've only got an hour or so, what might be interesting, for you and for me and for the listener is just to talk about your role now. And if it, don't want to sort of force it, but, if it kind of comes up, maybe draw on, what might have been some of the earlier experiences that it's like, okay, that's been really helpful in this facet of my job that, it's not the first time I'm seeing this sort of challenge. I saw it over in California or, down in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, COVID taught us that you've never seen everything, no matter how long you've been doing what you've been doing. But yeah, for the most part, I do feel really well prepared for everything that ever arises in my current position. I've been one way or another in the wine industry for 30 years now, so I think just that sort of pig-headed determination has gotten me a level of expertise that has been helpful. I think just all those sort of disparate bits of experience combine, and you can't really discern, right now I'm applying the experience that I got on the Endivin Group leadership team, or this is now I'm applying the experience that I got, and sometimes you do. Like I was involved in the fine wine development at Constellation and with Throb Mondavi Winery, and that was quite a similar strategy to what we're doing at Wirra Wirra, which is sort of making less but better wine. So our current strategy at Wirra Wirra is that that consumers are drinking less but better wine, so Wirra Wirra needs to adapt. We need to make less but better wine and more distinctive wines. So our strong belief is that the wineries that sort of thrive through the next 10, 15 year cycle will be the ones that are delivering a distinctive flavor experience that you can't get anywhere else that's highly appealing. And we do that where we also have a small sort of cult boutique Pinot Noir producer up in Piccadilly Valley in the Adelaide Hills called Ashton Hills. So Likewise, Ashton Hills has this very sort of distinctive flavor profile. It has this, kind of wonderful umami character that people love, and they know that the only way that they can have that experience is if they're in our wine club. So that's really the focus at Wirra Wirra, and it sort of flows into every element of the business. And it's just been awesome leading this team because there was such a great culture coming into the team, and so the team is so engaged with with Wirra Wirra and with this new strategy. So everything from finding new vineyards to we made big investments in winery, the type of winery equipment that I got used to using in Napa Valley, essentially to keep elevating the quality and really aiming to make wines that really showcase how good McLaren Vale wine can be. And then I guess investing in sort of engaging with the consumer and making sure that we're in the right places and with the right partners around the world. Yeah, it's been a really cool almost 3 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm always kind of struck by trends in wine. I had a conversation earlier this week with a marketer over in, she's based in Washington and works with a lot of wineries in the Pacific Northwest. And I myself was over in Oregon earlier this year. I'll be honest, I've never heard so much about what boomers want versus what millennials want versus what Gen Zers want, and maybe Gen Alpha, or I've heard more in an hour in Oregon about that than I've heard in sort of in a lifetime in the UK. But then it kind of got me thinking, I think we do something similar, but in the UK, but we don't subdivide. We will talk at length about the consumer, the consumer, it kind of lives off in the hills somewhere, like it's this sort of mythical,
the fictitious consumer,
hunting the consumer. I mean, I get where all of the direction is coming from and the reasoning, and seen obviously a lot of the data and trends. Could you maybe just unpack a little bit about just how that actually plays out? Because I think it seems to be one of those phrases, people are drinking less, we're drinking better, but it's got, there's a lot underneath that, isn't there? Because it affects as you said, the way the wine is made, the way the grapes are grown, all of your channels, just could you give us an insight into, I guess some of the building blocks, the stuff that we don't normally get to see or hear about.
I think the main thing is that your building blocks fit in so many wine businesses that the building blocks won't be cohesive. And that's really the key. But I like what you're saying about boomers versus millennials versus Gen Z. Through the ages, it's been handy for marketers to segment, but segmentation is complex. I guess what I learned at Constellation and then applied later at Villa Maria was you're better off thinking in terms of end need state or in terms of demand spaces. A demand space is where an end need state intersects with a specific demographic. So an end need state is basically a consumption occasion, really. They can be high energy, low energy. Wine is becoming more and more a low energy occasion drink, and as we're seeing seltzers and cocktails and things really rising, we're seeing those types of drinks owning the club or the party or whatever, and wine is very much for kind of lower energy, more relaxing on wine, chill occasions. But some of the end need states can be around reward or so I've really had a really hard week. I'm going to buy a 30-pound wine instead of a 15-pound wine tonight. So it's really, it's thinking about what role does your wine play in people's lives, and what can it can it? And I love the whole Shaquille O'Neal and Warren Buffett. They always talk about they only invest in businesses that improve people's lives. And I think when you start thinking about what you do in that way, then it becomes less transactional and more about having a relationship with your consumer. I do think the wine industry, we had it really good for 20 years. up until about 20, between say 1997 and 2017. I think in some cases we didn't appreciate the consumer as much as we could have. So I think now it is not about the consumer amorphously. It is about the consumer, what do you like? Understanding what you like, how are you feeling today, and what wine would add value to your life right now.
Yeah, I like that model. I like and so to keep this, I think, super specific, and I think almost using Wirra Wirra as a case study. Was that then in your thinking? Then it's like because there are various ways to do premiumization, right? It's like again, as you say, okay, what are the types of wines that you're going to see in the club? It's probably big champagnes, with or if you're in Dubai, with sparklers coming out the side. Does that mean that again, and maybe this might be useful to talk about your production levels as well? Is it like how does that sort of feels as though there's a tension between what do we have to play with? What can we make? And then what can we kind of go after? And I guess as well, does that differ country by country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it differs winery by winery and consumer by consumer. To answer your first question around Wirra Wirra, what did that mean? So we have this amazing foundation, which is called Church Block. Church Block is a blend that we've made, since 1972. And it, in the UK and in Australia and in certain markets, it has played a very meaningful part in a lot of people's lives. When I go around, particularly around Australia, but also around other countries around the world, when people know that I work for Wirra, they want to tell me their Church Block story, and it's Church Block was when I got my first proper job, and I knew that I'd made it. I went out and bought a bottle of Church Block, because that for a lot of people in Australia, Church Block was the first good wine that people bought. When I was unemployed or at university or whatever, I had to drink X, X, and X, but then when I got the good job, then I got to drink Church Block. So, and so there's a lot, that is a huge emotional connection that we have with consumers, right? We are delivering a need state for consumers that, for them was celebratory, was congratulatory. It was a feeling that they had made it. So that is an amazing kind of base to work with. And then it's just, how do we be more meaningful to those consumers? And so we think about the fact that we're at McLaren Vale, and, McLaren Vale, it's a warm Mediterranean, warm, dry Mediterranean climate in South Australia that's heavily maritime influenced. It has, 40 different geologies. It's one of the most geologically diverse wine regions of the world. It has some of the oldest vines in the world. It has some of the oldest soils, viticultural soils in the world, up to 550 million years old. So you've got this artist palette to kind of deliver very distinctive wine experiences for people. So that's really where we've gone. We've released a range of single vineyard wines. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're really sort of doubling down on our strengths. But by the same token, and this is where the volume thing comes in, we've taken 30,000 cases of volume, which was a range beneath Church Block in our portfolio called Scrubby Rice, and we've stopped making it. And that's because at that price point, we can't make a particularly distinctive wine. So we're not really giving the consumer anything unique or special, or anything that the winery down the road can't give them. So for us, it's really kind of doubling down on our strengths, which is McLaren Vale, Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, and Shiraz, Adelaide Hills, Chardonnay, Riesling, and Sauvignon Blanc. But so we have not gone down the all the Mediterranean varieties and this, that, and the other that a lot of people in McLaren Vale have, because that would not be authentic to us. There are people for whom that is their specialization, and that's their kind of gift to their customers. Our gift to our customers are, we can deliver wines that have great character, great authenticity. They're all handcrafted. And, these are sort of, buzzwords that I'm not actually using lightly. Like literally in our winery, we have 20 2-ton open top fermenters. It's crazy, but that's how we like to make wine. We like to take vineyard blocks and keep them separate through the winemaking and maturation process. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I think when say what I interpret as a similar theme kind of keeps coming up, and you've hit on one that has been consistently coming up actually recently there, Matt, when you spoke about Scrubby Rise, which I'm not sure if we see that in the UK. I obviously see Church Block over here, but I'm not sure if Scrubby Rise ever sort of made it over here.
I don't think a brand called Scrubby Rise could have ever survived in the UK.
I was going to say, yeah, that's like as Aussie as it gets. But the point that again, it's like bubbling up again is the whole idea of, okay, you've come out of that of that price point, let's say, or that arena, or you just you realize, okay, that's not going to sort of work for us. I think that the point is really around, okay, at a lower price point, let's just say that a lower price point, not to sort of throw shade on anyone's approach to winemaking or anything like that, but it's like, okay, at a lower price point where, as you talk about those people earlier on in their wine journey, where, okay, maybe it's not necessarily the aspirational wine, but it's they're still drinking wine, which I think is always good to have people in the family. You think how difficult is it to kind of please or surprise and delight, more to the point, people at that entry level? And the reason I bring it up, and the reason why I think it's significant for wine, is that I'm tasting a lot of non-alcoholic beverages, and they're absolutely surprising and delighting. You get into like a sparkling tea, or you get into something that's a seltzer based thing. I think an entry level, a little single serving, you can have that surprise and delight. Like, wow, that's incredible. Are we? How far are we, and how difficult is it to do that for wine?
It's doable. It's just not going to be. It's not going to be wineries of our size that do it.
Mm.
The reality is that as much as so many wineries try, you just can't be all things to all people, and you don't need to be. So Church Block remains the wine that you start drinking when you're ready.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we have to provide all the gateways to Church Block, because the consumer doesn't really, the consumer doesn't think about the industry anywhere near to the extent that we do. So yeah, they're happy to be taken on the journey by the retailer, or by their friends, or by influencers, or whatever. I think as an industry, and I feel somewhat hypocritical saying this because we don't do anything like this at Wirra Wirra, but I think as an industry, we got really obsessed 10 years ago about, to your point earlier, about, how are we going to bring millennials into and we brought out all these products, Moscatos and flavored Moscatos and this, that, and the other. And I just don't get a sense that there has been anywhere near that level of thought put into how we welcome Gen Z into wine. And to your point, it could be, it could be teas, the sparkling teas. I've had those. The ones I've had are very expensive. I don't know if you've found some cheaper ones.
Yeah, maybe. But just can is the can is able to bring down the price a little bit.
I think just bringing in the concept of a product with provenance that's been crafted and is delicious and is for low energy consumption occasions. And when you're sitting down with your friends, you're having a night in with your boyfriend or girlfriend and watching Netflix, it's probably not going to be a cocktail or a seltzer or something like that. This is where wine can just be, just be a wonderful enhancement. And, obviously around the dining table, but people are exploring around the different drinks around the dining table, and of course exploring non-alcoholic drinks around the dining table, and that's great too. I think the main thing is that for us in the wine industry to kind of know who we are and who we're not, and really try to connect and welcome. And what I'm seeing, I think, and also unfortunately, a lot of the people sort of in my position in the wine industry are similar to me in that they're older men, right? So I think the more diversity we have in the industry, the better, because people like me aren't necessarily the best people to know how to connect with Gen Z. Although, I think I've always been an extremely curious person. So I think I'm very open to change, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Like a front label, don't have a back label. If you can't say it on the front label, don't say it. And you only need 3 words, right? It could just be, bright, fresh, and, bright, fresh and juicy or something like that.
Yeah.
But, generations prior to mine, they didn't grow up sort of fossicking through a Hugh Johnson book. They've never had to dig for information. It's just been at their fingertips. So if you're not providing information on the front label at their fingertips, then you're not actually talking to them, right? So I think there's just lots of things in the wine industry where there are probably too many stodgy people my age making the decisions and not enough thinking about, hey, people aren't always like me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a point well made as well, Matt. It's just, I think it's just that whole, going from awareness to interest to desire, just that, even just that microcosm that you've said there, it's like, okay, how does somebody even arrive to be holding your bottle in their hand in the first place? It's like, okay, because let's again take a big step back. It's just not that easy. I mean, even myself, it's like sometimes I just, even if I'm going into, Marks and Spencer's, it's just like, okay, I can't be bothered to look at all the wines. Let me just, go and look up, a decanter article on M&S, and you kind of, okay, you've kind of done some of the work for me. But, are people out there going to do that? I think in a lot of cases they're just, okay, there's just hundreds and hundreds of wines in front of me. You're then in a straight shootout, aren't you? It's like, okay, is it to do with the color of the label? Is it to do with the positioning on the shelf? Is it to do with the country section that you're in, which is, a topic that I think we'll talk about? Is it France? Is it Spain? Is it rest of the world? These are the types of labels, and I think, as you say there, it's just like a whole thing of like every opportunity you need to get people along the funnel, as it were, right? It's like, okay, and then if you I think what you were describing there, and I've seen it. It's like you pick up a bottle and there's just so much written there about it, and it's like, okay, are you screaming at me through your branding and through your language? What the promise is to me if I want to risk my risk my money on this mysterious bottle of stuff that I can't taste yet.
And he's speaking language that I understand as well. Yeah, I mean, what we do here is that consumers that are newer into the wine category, they're more willing to explore, and so that's great. I think we are seeing a countercultural trend now because actually, given the current economic climate, people are far less willing to take risks. So we're actually seeing a sort of return to brands and a return to classic wines. Yeah, I think but that doesn't mean that we need to stop trying to make wine understandable, accessible, inclusive. The more sort of fun events that we can create that are not stodgy wine and cheese evenings. Yeah, I was at Pro Wine Shanghai, and there's everyone, classically behind their stand. And then, in this big sort of cavernous room, there was the local Chinese kind of natural winemakers. And, there's a DJ, and it's the party room.
But the tie came off then, yeah, and you got involved.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, so I think rethinking wine events beyond someone standing behind a stand and pouring wine and talking about it, rethinking wine language, rethinking wine packaging, rethinking connection and communication. So we have to appreciate that a lot of people, before they walk into the store, as you did, but it's not going to be decanter, I can tell you that much. But
TikTok,
it might be, but
Instagram,
it'll be TikTok and influencers and all that sort of things. I think we can't expect the new generation coming in of legal drinking age wine consumers to subscribe to Robert Parker's Wine Advocate and read it cover to cover like I used to, or Wine Spectator.
Yeah.
So how do those publications evolve? How do they retain relevance and make life easier? Is it an app? What is it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is something where I think it does. This will be really fascinating for me because again, I like to think that I kind of averted potential disaster when I went over to Oregon and gave my talk, because I completely underestimated, I guess, the weight that wineries placing on events held at the winery and the importance of the wine club. I'd kind of had to refocus and expand a lot of my examples and my talk based on that learning.
Well, you have incredibly wealthy and populous cities by those wine regions. I mean,
20 minutes
Washington
from Portland.
Wine regions are Seattle, you got Portland, you got San Francisco, so Santa Barbara has LA, so I mean, in those regions, your wine club and your wine consumers. But again, how can we be more welcoming to them? I think tasting fees went crazy in Napa. I think the tasting experience became so structured and perhaps a little bit
scripted,
formal. Yeah, exactly. And this has sort of created the boom of Paso Robles, right? Because Paso Robles, was historically a Wild West town where essentially criminals could. So I think it's continued to have that culture, and so it does have this far more very casual, much less expensive kind of wine tourism experience. So I think. No one needs to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's really just about sort of really kind of understanding who do you want your consumer to be, and how do you welcome them? How do you connect with them? How do you be a great provider of things to them? And if you think about the things that you consume and the people I get my coffee from, and I do want to have that relationship with them. I do want to know that I do want to know where my coffee's coming from. I do want to know that it's going to be good and consistent, and so I often think about the other things that I consume where I'm not as engaged with it as I am with wine, and try to apply the empathy that I hope that the people that sell me that have for me to our customers.
I love it. It would be great, almost to kind of complete that thought, really, in terms of what does that look like for you now? Is that something that you've already kind of, gotten and is now kind of aligned, I guess, to that premiumization strategy that you've spoken about there? What is that kind of, I think, wine club and wine event, those two just seem, again, from the Oregon, from the American experience, they just seem so intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. The big time. So I guess where we see our little corner of the world is that we do everything we can to deliver great wine in the bottle, and then we try to be as welcoming and grounded, I guess, and kind of unclenched as we can be as a winery. We're a fine wine winery with it's set up like any great Napa Valley or any great winery in the world. Top wineries of Bordeaux, but we have a 3-story tall medieval siege machine on the property, and we fling watermelons from it. We we have a 3/4 ton Angelus bell that anyone can ring and make a huge racket with. And so we try to just be really
neighbors nearby,
approachable, and thankfully not. Only my office right next to the bell, but that's okay. It's a good excuse to get out of the office. And we have a restaurant on the property called Harry's Deli, and it's, beautiful, local, seasonal produce cooked really beautifully, but it's not fussy. It's not, it's not fine dining. It's smart casual, I guess is the term, but it's its own thing. It's just a lovely place to come, and it's very warm and welcoming and hospitable.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll be accused of leading the witness. That was really the theme that came up in that conversation I mentioned earlier with the marketer Rachel over in Washington. I just thought she made the point so well. It was okay, don't worry, because I saw on the other side of things in Oregon, like a lot of the producers, they were asking questions like, kind of imbibed all of this theory around, boomers want this, Gen Z want that. And they were almost like, what do I do if I get a group that's got boomers and Gen Z in, and then I've got a couple of millennials over here? You could almost see people, overheating. And it feels as though, what you've just described there, Matt, is kind of where I think I'm at, and where I think Rachel is at with it as well. It's like, okay, the first point has to be you. It has to be, okay, what do I want?
Ask them their name and where they're from and what they like, right?
I meant slightly more in terms of, you being unashamedly Wirra Wirra. It's like actually, of course, all of what you said there, being hospitable, having that interaction, having good, rapport and all of those things. But at the end of the day, you can't be all things to all people. So you've got to choose, okay, we're going to have, the restaurant's going to be this type of restaurant. These are the type of experience that we want to give people when they come in. This is us, and that can't flip and flop in relation to the whims of the consumer, can it? That has to be something that you bet on, and you go with, and you say, okay, look, we're not for everyone, but the right people, they're going to absolutely love us. They're going to have the most incredible experience, and they're going to go away raving to us about all their friends and family.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the good old SWOT analysis still works, and what are your strengths? We'll play to those, right? Just double down on those. That's really, in a nutshell, that's, at least for us, that's what our strategy is, and it's working in a really challenging wine market. It's working. So
is events, or are events and things like wine clubs, are you finding more broadly in Australia, are they challenging? And I guess as well, is the culture sort of as ingrained as I see it in?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about offsite events.
Well, more like I guess let's say wine clubs and wine club pickup parties, all these sorts of amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we do on-site events. We have this beautiful, jetty out over the bell tower vineyard out front of the winery. And a couple of weekends ago, we hosted a lunch on the jetty. So people are literally floating in the vines and things. We take our events out into the city, up to Sydney and Brisbane and Melbourne and things, because we can't expect everyone to come to the winery. So we try to, when it comes to our wine club, if you're a wine club member, we want to be more than just, hey, we're going to deliver you some wine. We want to know you. We want to be, your peoples. We host events in those cities, but for decades it was the wine dinner, right? So you're sitting there, you're trying to have dinner, you got all these wines in front of you, you got some guys standing up and banging on at you, and so we've sort of changed, and we're not doing anything radical at all, because we're not a radical brand, right? So again, you just have to be empathetic to your consumer. You can't impose radicalness on people who just don't want that.
Yeah.
What we do is now we'll do a masterclass. So we'll present the tasting, and they'll have all the glasses lined up in front of them, and we'll taste, and we'll really play around with it and really sort of make it. I mean, education is still cool, but make it approachable. But so many people just love to learn new things and feel empowered. So we try to do these very educational masterclasses, and then we have dinner. And it's like, have dinner, have the wine that you've just learned about, chat with your friends. You're not going to have anyone interrupting your dinner. You just enjoy dinner, right? So these are, for us, it's minor tweaks, because, we are a more traditional brand, and we have a more traditional consumer base. But, if you're a more radical brand, for sure, bring in the DJs and do the pop-up bar and this, that, and the other. And people are, and it's working.
I love it. And I'll be honest, as you were talking there, Matt, the word I was thinking on the events and experience side was differentiation, because that was the word that you brought up on on the wine side of things, and being able to differentiate Church Block and being able to differentiate those higher tiers and those sort of single vineyard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is that a sort of a useful? You mentioned there's sort of tweaks. So is it a case of you're not looking to stand out too far? Things like that you mentioned there would you say they are important, and you notice them as important differentiators when it comes to events and experiences? Yeah,
giving people educational experiences, and I call it educational. It sounds a little bit like school, but I guess eye-opening or mind-popping experiences where you can run the scales of wine. So you can do same variety, different vineyards. I mean, people love that, since the Cistercians started eating soil, right? But then another thing that we love to do is verticals, and none of this is reinventing the wheel, but I think it's just is sort of doubling down on those things again, and so we'll do 4 vintages of Church Block back to 2002, and so it blows people's mind, because they're like, oh my God, I didn't think a $25 wine could age for 20 years. But also they get to see how wine ages, how wine evolves in the bottle, and they get to see how different vintages play out in different wines. They're having these kind of sensory and interactive experiences. I think it's that sort of interactiveness, the engagement, making it more of a dialogue than you talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely. That was certainly. Yeah, you brought up another point that has been going around in my mind really since the experience over in Oregon again, which is that actually, when you look at as you say, education or just transference of knowledge or some kind of experience like that, and you look at the various ways that you can get information across, lecture is really the format that wine is. It really the only format that wine uses. The expert stood at the front of the room, hopefully not behind a lectern, imparting wisdom and kind of pushing out the wisdom and knowledge to you as the in the audience as the sort of receiver. And one way of kind of thinking about that is things like training, but it's like you essentially you will kind of tolerate a lot depending on what the payoff is. And I'll own this. I think that a lot of times we see in the UK, we see a lot of masterclasses, and they're effectively trainings. They're very much one way experiences, and we will kind of tolerate is not the right tolerate is too strong of a word, but you know what I mean. It's like, okay, actually we know we're not necessarily feeling the most engaged, and it's not necessarily the most ideal format for us, but because there's wines there, it's like we'll stick with it. We'll kind of make it work. Yeah. There's wines coming.
That's your payment for the wines, isn't it?
Knowledge for wine exchange with a little bit of Instagram posting and tagging going on. I don't know.
Well, no, knowledge isn't the kind of rare commodity that it once was. So I mean, you can find anything out you want now. Whether it's the truth or not is another matter. But for me, I think podcasts are the most interesting medium for wine, because how do you convey everything that's amazing about wine in like a 15-second TikTok video? People, certainly people, digital natives don't have the patience to sit through lectures. So, but they'll listen to a podcast while going for a run or walking the dog or driving to work or whatever. So, I think podcasts are an amazing way for us as an industry to get our stories across, and it's really important that we do. I think the stories. The story of wine is struggling to kind of cut through the noise at the moment, and we need to make sure that sort of wine culture is preserved. The chances are, if you think of all the things that people 20 years ago were doing to get into wine, and they go to the wine shop, and they go to the tasting on Thursday night at the wine shop with the wine shop guy, and they'd get their Robert Parker Wine Advocate and their Wine Spectator and their decanter, and they'd have their books on wine, and and they might have a wine club at home, and their friends would come around and they'd taste wine, and all of those things. They're not the types of things that people are doing so much these days. But actually, the idea of an at-home wine club, like an informal wine club just among friends, I think is a terrific. That's absolutely, the people, who are sort of younger wine consumers that I talk to, they're totally into that idea. So how do we make that easy for them, right?
Yeah.
We need to help them.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I'll as we kind of look towards closing, though, I'm trying to think of a way to bring together like so much of what we haven't spoken about, because it's kind of always the way. I think it's it's right not to force the conversation. But I think I'd like to bring together, or if I think about bringing together the UK, Australian wine, which we haven't spoken about, and their medium and podcasts and events and communications and all these things. And I think one part of that for me, and again, this is a very personal thing, and I can own this completely. It's like I almost looking at Australia as its own brand, that's sitting above everything that you've spoken about there. I have kind of made overtures, let's say, over the years to the regions and to Wine Australia themselves, and said, look, really think about podcasting, because Australia's got such an incredible history. It's got such an incredible diversity, but it's got, again, back to what is your unfair advantage. It's got the unfair advantage around language, and identity, and it's like,
Yep.
that does capture, that does capture in a podcast, and it can travel out there, across the airwaves. It can travel to the UK and can travel to the US. I think, some thoughtful use of those types of media can actually prepare the ground before you come over and do a trade tour, or prepare people before they come over to visit you. I just think it can actually extend that experience. And, back to your point, you don't need to get everything into a 15-second TikTok. It can be 15 hours of podcasts, and it's like, okay, here's what we've done, guys. This is, the bigger stories, region by region or grape by grape, or, there's lots of ways to kind of cut it. And I know I've sort of, given a lot there to sort of think about, but I'm just curious, again, the broad topics, again, you can own this, Australia, the connection with the UK, and, podcasts or other modern media, as a way to bridge that gap, to bring the stories closer to the people who are actually consuming, and maybe more importantly, are going to be telling the stories.
Big time. Yeah. I mean, the UK is so important for us at Wirra Wirra. We've been, Wirra Wirra has been in the UK since 1979. But, I think Australia is going through a metamorphosis, and there's a bit of a lag, right? So Australia kind of used to mean more or less one thing, right? It was sort of, right, full-bodied Shiraz with lashings of oak, and and now Australia just means so many things. And I think for a lot of wine professionals globally, it's so complex now that they're like, oh, it's just easier not to engage with it, but at their peril, right? Because the wines coming out of Australia now are just so good and so diverse and so interesting. And they're from so many wine regions and so many different great varieties. But still, I travel around the world and people are still surprised tasting our wines and going, oh, this isn't big and oaky and those things. And yeah, it's cool. I mean, and that's cool. That's discovery. And that becomes something that, that's a connection that you make with those people because you introduce them to, I guess, the Australian wines of today. And no, I absolutely think that podcasting is a terrific way to tell our stories. We do have so many stories. I mean, Andrew Kayard, who's an MW, who's been a friend of mine for about a quarter of a century. He just wrote the definitive book on, called The Australian Arc on Wine History, and it's the heaviest book I've ever seen. It's kind of 3 volumes of weighing, I think it's something like 7 kilos or something crazy. Yeah. And that just tells you, that's the history of Australian wine. It is so fascinating, and there's just so much in there, and the stories are amazing. Andrew's written it really well. And as I said before today, we have a lot of the oldest vines in the world, and some of the oldest wines, they're just releasing 1925 Seppeltsfeld Paraport at the moment. So, you can drink 100-year-old port from Australia. You can go to the winery and buy it. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, I think it's, it's a great visual there about the, the 7 kilo book, and, all and I'm sure, well edited, well written, but it's just, again, it's that whole, almost, borrowing your analogy from earlier. It's like, okay, what is the kind of, what are the steps to getting people to go and look at that, because again, I'm sure it's incredible, but it's like I talk about this idea of building a bridge out of content, and saying, okay, what about a whole a kind of a podcast series and clips taken from some of those podcast interviews, and all of these little kind of digital breadcrumbs, which ultimately collage, just draw people in, because again, I know Australia is I've only visited once, but I absolutely loved it. It's just such an immersive culture, and I think that there's so many immersive experiences there. For that all to be reduced down to to your point there, these really out of date marketing messages that just don't apply, but out of date marketing messages live long in the memory,
absolutely.
It's how do we, and how do you, the collective you, replace those memories and ideas about what Australia is and what Australian wine is.
And it's going to take a while, because it's not like we're replacing, I remember, judging Decanter World Wine Awards and, going in and doing Argentinian Malbec and doing Priorat, and it's like, oh wow, Argentinian Malbecs, really freshened up its style. They're really fresh and floral and lovely wines. The old sort of heavy, soupy, oaky, Malbecs of old are, few and far between now. But Australia isn't just telling a story of a fresher style of Shiraz, which we're doing. Our Shirazes are much fresher and more vibrant and more floral today. But then you've got Grenache and you've got and Riesling and then you've got Tempranillo and you've got, Nebbiolo and then Gruner Veltliner and they're all terrific. And I think it's really hard for people to wrap their head around the fact that, Australia is a continent as well as a country. Yeah. So there is no Australia from a wine perspective. If you can believe that a country the size of Italy has the diversity that it has, then think about the fact that Australia is spread across a much larger landmass of, so many, more different climates and topographies and soils and things. So I think we've just got a long road ahead to sort of connect the world with the diversity of Australian wine. I think once we do, people will just be so excited to just explore. It is probably the best country, wine producing country to explore right now.
Yeah, and I'd be honest, I don't disagree with any of that. Just the only thing that, again, it's just a practical thing, isn't it? Again, focusing in on UK and Australia and that distance, it just seems like every activation, let's say, even sending samples or sending bottles, it's like, the entry price just is that much more, isn't it, in any of your cases? So it just feels as though every single type of activation, every visit to the market, it's got to sort of do that much more.
We're really lucky that, Matthew Jukes and Amelia Jukes and Emma Symington, they're out there creating these great opportunities for people to discover these wines. And, I really like what Amelia Jukes is doing with her new tastings. And she's got her Grenache tasting coming up fairly soon. And Wirra is going to be part of that, along with, a lot of really terrific Grenache producers. People in the UK haven't tried, Grenache from McLaren Vale and beyond before, then this tasting will blow their mind more than anything.
Amazing. And a great reminder. I'll be dropping the link to that in the show notes as well, and work to get that out in advance. And really in closing, from my side, absolutely love the conversation. And again, I really feel like it's such a huge topic, and you've got, I think, great experience and great opinions, and you have opinions on all of this, which is fantastic. But in closing, let's sort of, tie a bow on it. What would be the sort of places that people can find more about you or indeed Wirra Wirra? What are maybe, one or two of the things you think that might be a nice follow on from this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Lawrence. I enjoyed our conversation the other day, and I enjoyed our conversation tonight. So it's, I love talking about wine, and I love wine. I love the wine industry, and I just want wine to do well. And, sometimes I get a little bit soapboxy, but I'm just I'm just trying to throw little things out there that might get people thinking differently. I'm not trying to be prerogative or anything, but to engage with Wirra Wirra. So wirrawirra.com .au and explore the website. I think we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. The nice thing about being called Wirra Wirra is that it's pretty easy to find. And we're in the UK. I think you can find us in quite a few restaurants and wine bars and that sort of thing. Right now we have we're in the Waitrose, and if you go to Waitrose, and in the Waitrose magazine, there's win a trip to Australia with Wirra Wirra. Okay. Thanks to our great friends at Malaysia Airlines and the Flight Centre. So that's a really good option.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Matt Della, CEO of Wirra Wirra and Ashton Hills. I really love that we were able to discuss the challenges both at a macro level and explore specifics for Wirra Wirra. I'm there for the journey, and I hope that we continue the conversation about Wirra Wirra, Australian wine, and opportunities to tell those stories for the modern consumer. Visit wirrawirra.com, the link is below, where you can learn more, including a whole page dedicated to the catapult that Matt mentioned. Matt also previewed the next generation Grenache tasting organised by Amelia Jukes. This trade tasting takes place in London on Monday, the 28th of April. And if you're working in wine and would like to learn more, please see the Eventbrite link below to book a spot. Next time on the podcast, we continue our Australia mini-series. I'll be speaking with Giles Cook MW of Thistledown Wines. Subscribe to be alerted when that series episode goes live. See you then.